Hello everyone, this is Peak Entertainment and we're back again, and here now we have a video when we're going to talk about the DCEU movies, or for the most part the set of films viewed as the Snyderverse, and how I believe the cinematic universe failed the DC superheroes, or didn't do them proper service, or didn't properly utilise and maximise the potential that they could have had on the big screen. Now this might be an extensive video, so I will leave a timestamp within the description to cover all of the various topics that I explore throughout this video. Also be warned that there may be spoilers for most of the movies within the DCEU movie, so just in case you haven't seen them all yet, I'll just give you this warning now, as I'll be going over specific details of all the movies surrounding the DCEU. Now, when we come to talk about the Snyderverse or the DCEU, the movies that are primarily concerned around this area for me are as follows: Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman, Justice League, Suicide Squad, and Aquaman as well. I don't determine Wonder Woman as part of the Snyderverse because the first film and the second film very much took place in a period before the Snyder film, so they are very much of a standalone concept, and Shazam as well is very much detached away from the Snyderverse as well, so that's why I don't include those films in this overall discussion. Now I will primarily comment on the universe as a whole. I won't speak in depth and review the various movies because I've done that already in previous videos, and you can check all of those reviews that I've done with movies surrounding the Snyderverse all within my channel, and I will leave the links within the description. So here we go then with the overall reasons as to why I feel the DCEU or the Snyderverse didn't really produce or successfully exploit the DC heroes as what I feel they could have been done overall. And when I talk about how successful they were, I'm talking about both in terms of the box office and also in terms of transcending to a general larger audience. And I think overall, when I look back on the DCEU or the Snyderverse, I think it's primarily failed on both counts. So we're going to look at the primary reasons why I think it didn't deliver on both those fronts in terms of making the DC heroes as successful as what they should have been. So we come to the first reason, and that is deconstruction of superheroes. Now, this is for me the biggest reason why the DCEU or the Snyderverse failed as a whole. I felt that the DC superheroes in general are full of such great stories and have potential to make such great films and characters overall. And we've seen this past throughout many years and decades, haven't we? When we go through, of course, the Richard Donner Superman movies, and of course the Tim Burton Batman films, and various other television series, whether it be the Linda Carter Wonder Woman or the Smallville television series, and most recently, of course, the Superman and Lois CW series. So there's plenty of precedent where we've seen these heroes translated in a much more of a hopeful and inspirational nature, and that's what I think the right template is to use for the DC heroes. Now, obviously, when we talk about deconstruction, that is, of course, when we strip away those heroic and inspirational values, and we try to make these heroes much more flawed and vulnerable, therefore they can relate to modern audiences. Now, there's nothing wrong with a deconstructive hero, and we've seen plenty of great examples where if the character fits that template, then it can be a great story. We look at most recently the likes of Wolverine in his movies, the Netflix series, both Daredevil and Punisher as well. And we talk about a deconstructive hero. My perspective of it is more of an anti-hero, so a character who is not looking to save the world, but if trouble falls about his way, he will do a heroic act, right? So it won't be his overall mission, but at the same time he won't stand by and see people get killed if he can prevent it. So he's always got his own issues, his own torments to get through, but at the same time he will perform a heroic act if it comes forward his way. That's a deconstructive hero in my eyes, right? And that is not something I feel that you can adapt with these DC characters, in most particularly Superman, Batman and Wonder Woman. And I think for the most part the Snyderverse did exactly that, and it's no real surprise when we go way back to when Zack Snyder was first announced as the helmer of this new DC cinematic universe. You only had to go back and look at his previous work when we look at the likes of 300, Watchmen, Sucker Punch as well, and Dawn of the Dead to really determine that Zack Snyder doesn't believe in these more hopeful, inspirational icons. And he stated that in many interviews. You can go back and look online. We had those various quotes where he states that all heroes are corruptible and everybody's living in a dream world if we believe more in the inspirational characters. So that's the mindset that we are dealing with here, and it just doesn't fit, but most particularly with Superman. And I've already mentioned this in my Man of Steel review, how that was really primarily an example of a deconstructive take where Superman is wandering around having no purpose, no direction, no identity of what he wants to do or who he wants to be, and that is going against the ethic of Superman. Superman is a character who always knows who he is, always knows what he wants. He believes in saving the world, and he doesn't have to have any precursor or any driving motivation other than that. It's just his natural nature. That is the true essence of what the character stands for, and the Zack Snyder went completely against that. We also look at Batman, which is the same mistake, I feel, even though people can say, yes, there are darker elements to Batman as a character, particularly when we look at all of his villains overall. And yes, we all know that one of the major concepts of Batman is that he adopts much more of a fearful and intimidating mindset and method in order to combat the criminals from Gotham, and that makes perfect sense. But there's always a line that Batman will never cross. He will never kill, and he will never brutalize his villains to leaving them to near death. That is the line that Batman will never cross. And when we go to Batman versus Superman, Zack Snyder went over that line. We saw multiple scenes when Batman is branding people, stamping people, killing people. He's seemingly obsessed to a near paranoid level about wanting to destroy Superman completely, not showing any nuance or willingness to actually research what Superman has done over the activity since the Metropolis battle of Man of Steel, and he's just completely irrational, and that is not what Batman is as a character. Now, yes, of course, you can refer to the Elseworld, in particular the Dark Knight Returns, which is what they took inspiration from, but that is an alternate take, and Frank Miller has admitted that. You are adapting material from somebody who doesn't like the hopeful, inspirational icons, and that was always going to fail in my book. And when you, particularly, you were talking about the iconic presence of both Superman and Batman, that deconstructive take is not going to work, and that was one of the major reasons why Batman versus Superman in particular didn't produce the box office numbers that are what I feel it should have done, particularly when we're talking about the big screen meeting between Batman and Superman on the screen for the first time. We go on to the second reason, that is rushing the development of the universe. Now, as we all know, Man of Steel grossed 668 million at the box office, and I've stated before that I felt that was quite a fair take considering the long absence that we had in terms of a live action cinematic take on the character since Superman Returns from 2006. But Warner Brothers clearly wasn't patient, and they clearly wanted to chase the billions that Marvel had achieved most recently with the Avengers in 2012. And what they didn't understand is the foundations and the building blocks that Marvel took in order to reach that 1.5 billion take made by the first Avengers film. There's no way, if Marvel had started from the Iron Man film and went straight to the Avengers, that they would have achieved that amount of box office take. It was built steadily over time, and Warner Brothers just didn't learn from this. And I've mentioned already, they were dissatisfied with the box office take of Man of Steel, so they went ahead with Batman vs Superman and threw everything at the works. Batman, Wonder Woman, Doomsday, Lex Luthor, all in this huge melting pot just to try and see if they could fast track their way to the billions overall. And audiences, okay, we had an initial burst of hype and euphoria, particularly when you look at the reactions at the Comic-Con from 2013 when the project was announced, but later on audiences had a look back and realised that Warner Brothers was clearly going for a massive cash grab, and they weren't invested in these characters enough in order to get properly excited about the prospect of Batman versus Superman. They didn't feel that these characters were properly developed enough. Most people back then, and even more so now, believe that we should have got a Man of Steel standalone sequel where, after Clark Kent going through this whole journey of trying to discover who he is, in that sequel we get much more of the consummate and the consolidated heroic version of Superman. And then at the same time, we also should have got a standalone Ben Affleck movie as Batman, where we have time to go over his journey, find out who he is, and establish his purpose in this world as well. So Clearly, they should have adopted the same approach as what Marvel did in terms of giving each other characters a standalone film and then building up to the team-up movies. Yes, at the time, everybody was trying to say they shouldn't copy Marvel, but Marvel's approach worked. And I just think in general, that approach in giving audiences a steady flow of characters one shot at a time would have been the best way to ease audiences into this universe before giving you the big massive team up movie. So that's another big reason why I feel the Snyderverse failed. The third reason why I think the Snyderverse failed in general was the lack of personality in the characters. Now, when we look at overall the personality of all of the individuals within the DCEU, they really do lack a serious amount of charm or personality or liveliness. And again, audiences couldn't really relate to this. If you look at particularly the Zack Snyder Justice League version, there are multiple scenes where we have the team in a group together discussing their various plans and what they're going to do, and there just isn't any spark. There's no levity. If you have everybody whose personality are near enough the same, then you're not going to engage your audience. Only really the Flash had any kind of hint of, let's say, slight charm or humour about him, and even then I wasn't someone who was a major fan of their interpretation. They kind of made him this typical comic relief nerdy personality who hasn't really got any friends. So even with the Flash, I don't think there was a great deal of layer to the characters, and again, they had no depth to them. Everybody was just going through this typical routine, gride mark, serious nature about their work, and it's very unappealing and unattractive. And for me, when you are talking about movie making in the long run, great stories make great films and great characters make great franchises. And as long as you have a character or a group of characters that everybody likes, everybody can appeal to, everybody finds entertaining, then your movies don't necessarily have to be the greatest films ever, because people will always follow them no matter what, because they have a connection to these characters. And we've seen that right the way through for the most famous franchises. You look at all of the Rocky franchise, of course, the Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, and even most recently, of course, with the Fast and Furious. Everybody has an attachment to these characters, hence why they're able to continue that franchise and continue to be massively successful at the box office. There wasn't the same connection for the DC characters within this Snyderverse, and that's another very reason why it failed to produce the goods in terms of connecting with audiences. Now, the fourth reason why I believe the Snyderverse had failed is the fact that the movies just weren't that good. Now, this is obviously going to be very subjective, but if you look at overall the critical reception in terms of all the movies, or the majority of them, and it's very difficult to see that there is a real positive reaction. It was only really Wonder Woman, the first film directed by Pankey Jenkins, that had a real positive critical reception about it. And as I've stated before, that is something that I think is actually distant from the Snyderverse, along with Shazam as well. So when we look in particular at Man of Steel, that was a very divisive film overall. Whether people want to admit it or not, that was the truth. It divided audiences overall, and Batman vs Superman went even worse. It had a hugely negative reception at the box office. Everybody didn't feel that it was a film that was well constructed. They felt the tone was very dour and unappealing, and the action was incoherent, and the effects weren't even that substandard overall. So yeah, they weren't even great movies overall. And even Aquaman, despite the fact that it made over $1 billion, that really did get a mixed critical reception overall. And when you are building these franchises, I did state they didn't have to be Oscar winners, but at the same time, they do have to be a certain level of quality. And that's another reason why the MCU has managed to be so successful, because on some level, people can go into those films and be entertained, enjoy them, and find them very accessible overall. Now, okay, you want to accuse them of being very formulaic, but at the end of the day, they do have a certain entertainment value that was sadly missing from the DC movies. And no matter how well known the characters are, at the end of the day, if your films aren't very good, then you're not going to be able to sustain your cinematic universe. So that's another major reason why I believe the Snyder Cut failed as well on that front. Now, we come on to the fifth reason why the Snyderverse, I believe, wasn't successful, and that's because others did it better. There were better alternatives in terms of creating a cinematic universe around a group of superheroes over time, and audiences were looking at other universes that were far more successful commercially or in terms of staying true to the characters, and then they were using that in comparison to the Snyderverse and really then being more critical of it. Now, of course, the obvious choice when we talk about this issue is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We don't really have to talk about that in length. That has been a truly hallmark and cultural franchise impacting the industry for the best part now for over 12 years, ever since we started with Iron Man and going through all the way through the first Avengers movies and later on with the likes of Guardians of the Galaxy, of course, and then we go on to the Infinity War and Endgame, and it's just been a huge milestone and also a massive example of how to treat these characters. As I stated before, you introduce them one step at a time, giving audiences chance to get used to these characters and then build them up in a team-up movie overall. And everything from the personality of the characters to the entertaining style of the movies to the fact that they were able to almost create what we would say is more of a television series rather than a movie franchise, getting everybody excited and looking forward to the next installment. It was just the blueprint way of really creating a cinematic universe and maintaining a franchise. And to be fair, not only Warner Brothers, but we've seen many other attempts by studios to try and recreate the magic formula set by Marvel and failing in the long run. We go away from Marvel and then we can also talk about the Arrowverse created by the CW. Now, we all know what the Arrowverse is, but just in case anybody who doesn't, this was of course a string of superhero shows set by the CW network that initially started with Arrow, starring Stephen Amell, and for the first part, that was really more of a standalone entry, really working more in tandem, again, that darker, more deconstructive take that I think entertainment was really following the trend on, initially set by the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy. But over time, they introduced Barry Allen's The Flash starring Gustin, and later on we had the spinning off of the team of the Legends of Tomorrow. Shortly after that, we had the introduction of Supergirl, and then we would go on even further where we saw the likes of Black Lightning introduced and also Batwoman as well. And very much the Arrowverse adopted the same methodology that the MCU did. We had time to introduce to these characters one step at a time, and at the same time we would eventually build up to explore them more in the big crossover events. Now, it was an even easier job, of course, in terms of a television series, because you can introduce these characters on a weekly basis. And over the course of several years, you can give the audiences a steady diet of all of these great escapist superhero antics and really get us to appeal to the characters. And much like the MCU, the Arrowverse hit the same beats that made it so successful. So once again, we veered away from the deconstructive take and we had much more of a bright escapist feel to these characters, where they very much stuck more to the true nature and the source material. They fully embraced the fun and the adventure of the comic book event of stories, and we saw that right the way through the aesthetic in terms of the costumes and also in terms of the characters themselves. And there was very much, when we look at all of the shows from the CW, that sense of family and friendship and companionship and togetherness, and you can see that all the way through the shows. That is one of the key elements as to why it was successful. Now, yes, the CW shows have been criticised for maybe delving too much into the soap opera. Many people have criticised the fact that we get multiple sequences where we have characters sitting in corridors talking about their feelings, and yes, sometimes the shows have overindulged from that aspect, but at the same time you need that. You can't just have everybody doing all the superhero action and then not have to delve into the characters, otherwise it would feel empty. So again, the CWs on some level, they too understand that it was the characters that was most important, and if you go through all of the shows and analyse each of the cast of characters, everybody has a different, distinct personality, which they can use to spark off other casts of characters and therefore make it a much more brighter and appealing universe to go into. And much like the Marvel films as well, they did it again. They build up steadily to all of the crossovers overall. And this really culminated in what I believe was the best crossover within all of the Arrowverse, and that was the superb Crisis on Earth X 4-parter. I believe that was in 2007, and it actually came shortly after the original Joss Whedon Justice League movie was released. And I think most fans, if not all fans, pretty much agreed that that Crisis on Earth X was essentially the Justice League movie that we should have got, and that had everything. It had the spectacle, it had the compelling storyline, it had that true sense of camaraderie between all of the characters. It wasn't just centered around one particular character. Every character from all of the shows were all prominent in some way, shape or form. It was great. All of these scenes where we saw the looks of the Flash and Green Arrow and the Legends of Tomorrow all working together. Even the climatic battle at the end, where we get that real battle royale, we get that great shot of all of the heroes standing together in a row and they're taking on all of the various forces as well. Hugely magnificent, just great lines overall. And none of the Snyderverse had those moments. Even the most recent Zack Snyder Justice League had nowhere near the truly euphoric and the fist pumping moments that the Crisis on Earth X crossover did. And that is another major reason why people were looking at other alternatives to what the Snyderverse was trying to do and feeling it wasn't doing as well its job as what others were. And the CW verse, whether you like it or not, and it's not perfect, and yes, there are flaws overall, but in general, in terms of building and sustaining a massively encompassing cinematic universe in terms of the DC heroes that everybody of all ages can come into and be welcome into, and really again inject that sense of fun and adventure and spectacle. It did an amazing job, the Arrowverse, and I'm sorry, the DCEU or the Snyderverse really paled in comparison overall. Another alternative that showed where the DCU or the Snyderverse had failed is, of course, the animated universe. Anybody who in fandom, we're all well versed in the string of incredible animated shows that was generated, particularly in the early to mid 90s and then rejuvenated again in the early 2000s. And of course, we are talking about the amazing Batman the Animated Series in 1992, the Superman the Animated Series later on in 1994, I believe, Batman Beyond in 1999, Teen Titans as well, and then later on, of course, in the early 2000s, we had, of course, for me still, the incredible and almost incomparable Justice League and Justice League Unlimited shows. And it was really those shows in particular that showed you how to create a massive universe with all of these characters, and they really did tap into the extensive DC lore and mythology. Just go and watch all of those episodes. Supreme animation, just great characterization. Again, everybody was involved, in particular the Justice League Unlimited, where we really unloaded and tapped into many characters within the DC mythology that we hadn't really heard a lot about. So all of the characters within that show were done so masterfully well, and they were able to create great stories, great adventures, and it really peaked for me with that Cadmus arc in the Justice League Unlimited. That was the perfect way, and that really covered all of the serious, more intense themes that the DCU really wanted to try and attempt to, but it did it in such a better way because that show didn't have to deconstruct the characters. So if you look at the final quarter of the Cadmus arc in particular, we cover over the same themes that of superheroes and whether they are too powerful, can they really be trusted with the influence can they have, should they really be controlled and regulated. Again, we cover the similar themes with the MCU, in particular with the Captain America Civil War, but the difference here is that the superheroes, yes, they had their conflicting battles, but they weren't trying to kill each other. They still stayed within the character that suited them best. And of course, with the DCU, in particular with Batman vs Superman, that wasn't the case. Everybody was trying to kill each other, murder each other, and it just didn't appeal to audiences. So again, that was another big reason why I believe this DCEU and Snyderverse didn't work, because there were other alternatives of cinematic universes or superhero universes that were being done far better, and audiences were comparing and asking the question, why couldn't the Snyderverse have attempted the same levels of greatness that we saw with the MCU, with the Arrowverse, and of course the DC animated universe as well. So overall, those are what I believe were the main reasons why the Snyderverse failed in terms of exploiting the DC superheroes and not making the massive cultural impact that we saw, particularly with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I've gone on record saying multiple times that the DC heroes, definitely in terms of Superman, Wonder Woman and Batman, at the very least, the most iconic superheroes within all of popular culture. I would only say in terms of Marvel, perhaps Spider-Man can compare on the same iconic level, but in general the DC characters were all far well known than what the Marvel ones were, but Marvel somehow took the lesser names from the likes of Ant-Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange and Black Panther and really turned them into major mainstream household names. And the fact that the DC universe couldn't do the same with the more popular DC characters is really showing a sign of failure. And I just think it's been a whole mess, and I've always held off doing this video because we've had most recent reports where we had the fallout after the Snyder Cut about what were the numbers in terms of the streaming. Is it stopping? Is it continuing? And the fact that Warner Brothers have stated that they're moving on now, and we're seeing now future projects with Black Adam and Shazam 2 and Aquaman 2, they're already started filming as well. We're pushing ahead with Robert Pattinson's Batman. We will, in all likelihood, get a third Wonder Woman movie. And of course, we're going to get the Suicide Squad sequel later on this year. So the Warner Brothers have already announced that they're moving on. So if the Snyder Cut was such a success, then we would have continued. And regardless of what numbers they reveal, at whatever shareholder meetings or various reports, the fact is the Snyderverse didn't do the numbers in terms of the theatrical box office or the streaming services overall. If it did the big numbers overall, then we would still be continuing. If it managed to reach a huge connection with audiences, we would still be continuing. If it managed to appeal to younger audiences and older audiences as well, we would still be continuing. If it manages to create really good quality movies, we would still be continuing. And it didn't manage to do any of that, and that's reasons why I truly felt it failed at the box office. So just to recap again, one reason was the deconstruction of the heroes. The second reason was the rushing in the development of the cinematic universe. The third reason was the lack of personality within the characters. Reason 4 was that the movies, for the most part for me, weren't that good. And reason number 5 is that there were other alternatives in building a universe that were far superior in comparison. So when we look at all those factors, those are the major reasons why I believe the Snyderverse failed the DC heroes, and now it's time to really move on from this. And this will probably be the last video that I will do in terms of the Snyderverse. I've covered it in so many other videos ad infinitum right now, and I just think it's time for audiences to move on. I know there are hashtags and trends on Twitter. I've stated before that I think a lot of that audiences are just using that just to kind of be part of a community and increase their own profiles rather than having a real passion for the DC heroes. But it's time to move on now. We've closed the book on it now. Audiences got what they wanted in terms of getting the Snyder Cut. It came out, it didn't do the numbers that Warner Brothers were hoping for, so they've moved on now to future projects, and I truly believe that is what audiences should do so as well. So there it is, the summary, the Snyderverse. It failed to DC heroes, and hopefully now we can go on and really start again and try and build a cinematic universe within the next, I would say, 5 to 7 years. I think there does need to be a break once this current crop of movies comes out, where we can just take a step and start again. And first port of call, get Superman right. Don't even think about doing any cinematic universe till you get Superman and Batman right, and then you can progress on from there overall. So those are my thoughts and feelings on the Snyderverse, and the main reasons why I think it failed the DC heroes in terms of a commercial and a cultural impact as well. I know many people will have different opinions and thoughts on this, and by all means drop your comments in the comment trail below, and I will try to reply to all of them, and we can debate this even further. But for me, the Snyderverse has been, for the most part, a big failure, and I think we need to close the book and start again. So those are my thoughts and feelings on the Snyder Cut and how it failed DC heroes. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please also hit those like and subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content in the future. But that's it for now. take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.